because energy is such a ubiquitous concern, I think it really touches on a lot of policies from different areas. And so this would include defense, commerce, agriculture, obviously energy, and then also environmental policies. That's NEMS, or the National Energy Modeling System, as a way to provide a consistent and comprehensive forecast of energy and supply and demand for the United States that would be available basically to all public and private entities. Energy model is typically going to simulate the supply, conversion, and demand of energy in some form. Depending on the application, it could be a very long-term model of global energy supply and demand, or it could be a short-term model looking at something as small as a demand for a single building. So in addition to the supply and demand of energy, a model will typically forecast parameters of interest such as capital cost, operating costs, and fuel costs needed to meet the projected demand for energy. May also include emissions or other environmental impacts. Well, generically speaking, an energy model is used to guide decision making, either understand the uncertainties or to define a least cost plan or a path to meet their objectives. So I would say that any policy that is concerned with the supply or demand of energy is probably relying on a modeling forecast for fuel price forecasts. And the first place most people will go for that forecast is the Annual Energy Outlook, which is a result of the National Energy Modeling System. Examples might be electric utilities use energy models. They use them for short-term forecasting. For instance, they might want to know which power plants they have to prepare for operation over the next few days. An electric utility might also use models for long-term energy planning to decide which types of power plant investments to make them the most competitive over a number of years.
Meet Pat, the androgynous utility CEO / policymaker at the center of our story. In addition to generating electricity now, Pat needs to think about what future investments to make in power plants or the transmission grid. If it's baseload power Pat's system needs, they could build a 100 megawatt coal power plant, or take the risk of going through the long permitting and construction process for a zero-emission nuclear plant. And if you have too much power capacity, why not build transmission lines to try and sell this excess energy to those who might need it? Or you could generate valuable peak demand power using solar PV panels or natural gas turbines.
for 2.5 years was a company commander, and so I was responsible for all the logistics, which is the general supplies, food, fuel, and maintenance for an artillery battalion. And so obviously fuel was pretty important to us. So one example of a thing that we had to do is we had this HEMTT fuel tanker, which is I think 1,000 gallons of fuel, and we'd go out there with a convoy to various traffic control points and refuel the vehicles that they were at a stationary TCP. The operational risk was paramount, trying to keep the soldiers safe and then at the same time accomplishing the mission. But fiscally, or how much it costs, that was never a concern. We would just go to the fuel point, which was operated by contractors, and we just fill up. As far as just the cost, the Army is going to pay whatever they're going to have to pay the cost to supply the troops, and then the contractors that are doing it, they're guaranteed to make a profit. So there is quite a huge cost associated with it. The contracting officers that were in charge of writing that contract were very conscious of the cost and trying to make sure that we, as the taxpayers, weren't getting ripped off. Yes. I think that the first iteration of these contracts was basically, let's just get something written so that we can, meet the requirement, and then we can worry about it later.
So it's important to keep in mind that, of course, models aren't crystal balls, but the reason they're popular and why we rely on them is that they provide a well-defined and systematic approach to examine questions. And ultimately, that's better than trying to make these decisions without a model, which is really analogous to informed speculation.